Hi, my name is Andrew Sears, and I'm the president of City Vision University. And in this lecture, I'm going to talk about why history and tradition are important to ministries. I'm an innovator. I was at MIT. I was a part of starting at .com. My advisor was one of the fathers of the internet. So I love innovation, but I've learned that I have to balance that with understanding, why things are the way they are. So I've spent, a lot of my life reading history. So, and I think what we're trying to do is promote within ministries. What you want to have, using the Wesleyan Quadrilateral as kind of a tool. How do you increase your ministry core competencies across all of these domains? Now, you can have your own emphases that's aligned with your ministry values, but one of those is just how do you navigate history? How do you learn from that? How do you value that? So that's what this talk is about. And the context for this is a lot of ministries are facing a discontinuity. So, you've been growing and all of a sudden society's changing. And, in innovation circles, this is called an innovation extension. And what is needed in a lot of context is a new wineskin or a recontextualization or a new theological vision. And this is extremely difficult and dangerous. So what you have to do as you're navigating this is you have to have an appreciation for tradition. So understanding the how and why of history, but then you also have to have core competencies in innovation and emerging trends and models. So you have to get dual expertise. To be able to do that. And, a lot of times people are focused on either one or the other. So to understand that framework, it's helpful to understand what is deconstruction, what is reconstruction. Well, and how does that relate to postmodernism? So what deconstruction really is about is you have all these paradigms and you are saying that there needs to be a new paradigm. There needs to be a new wineskin. So what you're doing is you're deconstructing the old side. But then there's this other thing that I'm calling integrative reconstruction. All education and all postmodernism's basically stuck here. The point of this whole talk right now is that this is what we need to be doing, but this is generally not taught. So one of the things we're trying to do, we serve a lot of different types of ministries. One of those is the Gospel Rescue Mission movement. So, we have about 80 partners among rescue missions and Salvation Army and other ministries serving the poor. So one of the things we're doing is we've started a Gospel Rescue Mission Heritage Project, and we're trying to help people. You need to understand your histories. You need to understand the larger movement that you're part of. You need to understand the 2,000-year history of Christian charity that you're a part of, and you need to understand what's happened in that. So, understand your history. So that's great. Get your history. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what's happening right now in history, because history suddenly has become this big political weapon. So postmodern approaches to weaponizing the teaching of history. So the most, where it starts is you get a biased selection of historical facts. And then you're intentionally deconstructing history and culture, and then you're reconstructing a counter narrative. You can go even farther, and you can, and this isn't currently happening that much in the U.S., but sometimes happens. You have cultural suppression where you're not allowing, other things, and then you see things like cultural genocide, where historically, for the Chinese Communist Revolution as an example of there's more on this side of things. So, one of the main valid points of postmodern understanding of history is that there's a biased selection of historical facts that just come from the majority culture perspective, and then you have a minority culture perspective. Now that's completely valid. There's two sides to every story. If you ever have a conflict with your spouse, there's what you thought happened, there's what she saw happen. You had two perspectives, so that's important to get. Now, what's happened over time, and this, I think the left was a little quicker on this, but I'll talk about the right. So this isn't, a political thing. So, there's this book that was written called Rules for Radicals, and it's really been the playbook for a lot of people who kind of take a Machiavellian, the ends justifies the means approach to social action and to bringing change. And what's happened is you take that type of attitude, you take social media, and you get weapons of mass, what I would call deconstruction. And then all of a sudden you have this ethically relative power politics. You use intersectionality as a tool of political manipulation, where the idea is you try to get everyone to define themselves in terms of some sort of intersectional segment, and then saying, the majority culture is kind of our opposition, right? And intersectionality can be a very useful tool for analysis, but it also can be used for politically manipulation. And then what you do is you can create an entrenched oppositional mindset, and you can have an indoctrination to a meta identity as a Democrat. And basically what you can do here, if you control history, is you create a party line Democrat for life. Now, some of you are probably mad at me right now because you think I'm picking on Democrats. Well, the same thing's happening with Republicans, as bad or worse. The difference is populism's the tool rather than intersectionality. It's a tool of political manipulation. But right now, both sides are doing this, and they're doing it brutally. And the idea is, if you can control history, you can indoctrinate your side, and you're increasing, polarization, and this kind of meta identity. So, and what you're trying to do is create party line, people for life by the way that you educate them. That's what these wars of history are about. Now, I think there's a better solution to this. And I think that, rather than having this power politics approach, I think the better solution, I like to use the marital conflict analogy to understand reconciling Reconstructionism as another approach to history. So the goals of this type of approach is understand what actually happened, empathize with how the other side experienced it, develop a more vibrant and healthy relationship. So if you've ever been to counseling, or you've ever learned healthy conflict resolution, this is what you're trying to do, right? So there's her side of the conflict, there's his side of the conflict. I had this image generated by Bing Chat. This is an AI image. So anyway, so that's another approach to history. And I think that's a more helpful one because it lends itself towards trying to empathize, with the other side. Now, I believe that deconstructionist history is lazy education. So if you take Bloom's taxonomy and you have learning, deconstruction is analysis, sometimes evaluation, but it's lower level learning. Reconstruction, and this integrative reconstruction, is really it's at the peak. And really, this is where we should be spending our time. So this is what doctorates should be focused on from my perspective. Most doctorates are focused on deconstruction. The vast majority of doctorates in the social sciences and things along those lines are in deconstruction. And honestly, I mean, that's a step in the process, but it isn't the end step. So let me just kind of use, provide a little bit more. So postmodern deconstruction history, what it does is it challenges traditional interpretations. It highlights biases and power dynamics. So if you frame everything from the majority culture perspective, you're going to be bringing in biases, and that has a lot of implications. So then you create historical counter narratives to deconstruct ethnocentric views of history. But from my perspective, often what they do is they fail to recognize the value of the other side. There's certain strengths. I use the example of fundamentalists. I'm not a fan of fundamentalists, but there's some things we can learn from them, right? So it's the same type of thing of any other side. We can learn from the other side. So often fail to recognize the value of the dominant culture. So an example is secularizing history. So this is where you're deconstructing Christianity. So you're secularizing history, focusing on the failures of Christianity without recognizing its contributions. So that's something that I would say the dominant form of history currently in most of Western society is focused on this. So deconstruction, from my perspective, is to education what memes are to social media. So they're lazy, they're viral, and it makes you feel good. But it's not constructive is the problem. So I think there's another solution. It's integrative reconstructionist history. So you reconstruct the past, focus on an uplifting narrative of cultural heritage, recognizing the strengths and weaknesses. So I think the best model is the Bible, man. The Bible is historically just so brutally honest, but also gracious in how it shares Israel's story. or the story of individuals. Even the story of David. He's just such an amazing hero, and messes up so big time you can't even believe it. He would have been canceled, right? But that's an approach to history. I think of the Bible. So the goal is to recognize our unique role and place in history. So an example could be to recognize the amazing historical contributions of Christianity or your movement, while also acknowledging and repenting of its most brutal failures, right? So here's a key question. So how can you tell your movement's history in this way? And what I would argue is, as a leader, a part of your job is as an integrative reconstructionist historian. So this repenting part, often you're going to have to make pivots. You gotta repent as a part of those pivots, and you got to explain what happened in history where you got it wrong, or why it was right at that time but is wrong now. So let me just kind of show another diagram of how you can do this. So combining deconstructive and reconstructive approaches to history. So you always start with biased selection of facts. It's just how the world works. You can only pick one selection of facts, and it's always going to have bias. That's just how it is. Then what you do is you deconstruct history and culture. So you try to understand what actually happened on the other side, empathize with how the other side experienced it, develop a more healthy, vibrant relationship with the other side. Now, I'm going to use some personal examples of this later. Name and pursue reconciliation for collective sins in history. You don't just say, okay, hey, that was great. Sorry for that. We're going to ignore the fact that, whatever happened in history. And you essentially, the way I describe it is you minor in the history of other cultural groups. Now, the other part is you're trying to create a reconstructive, integrative counter narrative that's combining, both sides, right? So reconstruct an integrated, empathetic understanding of history. Have that inform your personal and collective actions. So like policies, how you vote, things along those lines. Develop a more healthy, vibrant relationship across groups. Deepen your own positive cultural identity, recognizing the historical pain your cultural group may have been a part of and causing. And you major in the history of your own culture. This is what I recommend that all ministries do. And this is, whatever cultural context that you're in. And this has kind of been my approach. So, I grew up on this standard Western civilization curriculum. So that's a biased selection of facts, just by the fact it's Western civilization, right? And then you deconstruct history and culture. So there was a season where I was just reading tons of books in this space. I read 20 plus books from minority culture perspectives, Black history, African history, Indian history, Native American history, Chinese history. I attended secular universities that focus exclusively on negative aspects of church history and religion. I attended elite universities and upper middle class churches that devalued my working class, low income background. And honestly, in this deconstruction, I learned cultural self-hatred of all my background. Now, some of you are saying, well, that's pretty horrible. Never do that. Well, it's kind of been the same thing whenever I had to repent of my own sins. There's aspects that for each aspect of my culture. So if you take, my Christian aspects of the culture, the aspects, social class, the fact that I'm a white male, all those things, there are historical implications of that, right? It's helpful to learn those because I'm not just an individual, I'm also a member of a group, right? Now, then what I've done is reconstruct an integrative counter narrative. So reconstructing an integrated, empathetic understanding of history. That's informing my own personal and collective actions. I'm developing more healthy, vibrant relationship across groups, developing my own positive cultural identity. And this has really been the big shift, and I would say the past 10 or 15 years for me, is that, I am who I am, and I need to learn the positives of that and not just focus on the negatives and, major in the history of my own culture. So all of that is helpful. I think this is what ministries need to do. We need to understand history deeply. We need to understand the history of different groups deeply. We need to understand how we relate to traditions. So hopefully all this is helpful. I think that the intent of this is to help us guide ourselves through these cultural changes so that we can at least appreciate history, appreciate tradition, and how we relate to various traditions. Thanks a lot.